Hello ladies and gentlemen, once again this is Jeremy Smith, Photographer Did the Great. Recently I was contacted by one of my subscribers named Kevin, and Kevin currently has a Nikon D200, and he was asking me why exactly should I upgrade to the latest and greatest camera model whenever photographers were able to get great images with the D200 whenever it was first released. This is something that I've thought about a lot recently actually, and depending on what you're doing as a photographer, the latest and greatest camera model may matter and it may not matter. Now, one of the things to remember is whenever we start talking about taking photographs, the biggest thing that's going to dictate what you're able to do is going to be how much light you have. Obviously, photography is, well, it's all about light and capturing light. It's basically what happens whenever you take a photograph. So, if you're shooting in conditions where you're in control of your lighting, then having the latest camera is not really going to affect things a whole lot. It may affect some usability things. You may have a few bells and whistles like GPS or Wi-Fi or things along those lines. But ultimately, if you're in control of your light, you can do very, very great things no matter what camera you're using. I know plenty of portrait photographers that solely shoot in the studio, and they're able to, pretty much all of them are using older cameras. I know plenty of them that are using Nikon D70s and D100s and Canon 20Ds and 30Ds. And under those conditions, it doesn't really matter as much because if you're shooting in a studio, you have the option of turning up the power on your flash or turning it down. You can use different modifiers on your lights. You can pose your subject in a different way. And so you're pretty much in control of the entire situation. The other thing that happens is whenever you have complete control of your light, you're able to shoot your camera and your lens at settings that are more optimal for its performance. So on any camera, if you shoot at a higher ISO, you basically increase the sensitivity of the camera to light. But the downside of that is you end up with a much grainier photograph than you would if you were shooting at a lower ISO. If you're in a studio though, once again, as I said, you're in complete control of your light. So in the studio, you can shoot your camera at its lowest ISO where it's going to produce the best image. You can also close your lens down more. And anytime you close down your lens more, now you don't want to close your lens all the way down, but if you close your lens down a little bit past its widest aperture setting, then the lens is going to produce much sharper results. So once again, if you're in a studio and you have enough light, you can afford to close your lens down a bit, so the lens is going to produce a much sharper image, and then you have your camera shooting at its lowest ISO, so it's going to produce the sharpest, least grainy photo possible as well. So in a condition like that, using the latest and greatest camera is not going to really matter. Even the lens itself, even though the lens is going to matter more than the camera, the lens used is, still not going to be as big of a part of things either. If, however, you're shooting under conditions where you are not in control of your lighting, and the number one thing that comes to my mind is a wedding. If you're shooting a wedding and you can't use flash during the ceremony, that's going to be, a situation where no matter your skill level, I could be the world's best photographer or the world's worst photographer, but if you gave me let's just say, since we're using the D200, let's just say you gave me a D200, and you gave me a lens that had a maximum aperture of f4, and you said, okay, Jeremy, shoot this wedding. By the way, we're going to turn out all the lights in here, and we're just going to leave those candles lit over there. And okay, here's your camera, and here's your f4 lens. Go to town. Regardless of my skill level, there is absolutely no way possible I could get those photographs in available light. There's just no way I could do it. The camera is not going to have nearly enough ISO range, so I'm not going to be able to go up to a high enough ISO to actually get the image. A Nikon D200 goes up to a maximum of ISO 1600, and of course, if I'm shooting with the lens that only goes to f4, it just wouldn't add up to the proper exposure if I were shooting in very low light conditions and couldn't use a flash. If, however, you gave me a Nikon D700 where I could go up to 6400 ISO, well, going from 16 to 6400 ISO, that already means that I'm dealing with 4 times as much light sensitivity. And then if you gave me a f2.8 lens versus a f4 lens, I'm going to double my light gathering once again. So with that type of setup, I would be in a much better position to be able to get the photographs I needed. And so a lot of times if you're shooting in an extreme situation like that, it can literally make the difference between having a photograph that's completely black or terribly blurry to having a photograph that can actually be used. In terms of photography, the other thing that comes into play, and this is something that kind of builds on my previous statements, but going back to the whole wedding thing, if you're shooting weddings professionally, and this is kind of a chicken and egg scenario, you know, it's kind of hard to know which one came first. And the same thing applies here. It's kind of hard to know if clients' expectations of wanting photographers that could shoot in very low light without a flash, it's hard to know if that came first, or it's hard to know if photographers just started doing that by themselves or on their own first when the equipment became available to do that. It's hard to know which one came first, but at this point, you know, a lot of people, whenever they're wanting someone to shoot their weddings, you know, a lot of venues expect you to not use flash during the ceremony, and people still want to see images that are nice and colorful and very, you know, free of noise and things like that. And so, if you look at this from a business aspect, if there are other photographers in your area that are shooting, and they're shooting in that style, and clients are getting, you know, very high quality images that are shot in very low light conditions without flash, and you're the guy that can't shoot under those conditions, unfortunately, because of the nature of business, you're not going to be able to compete with the other photographers that are shooting that way. So in that type of example, if you're the guy that can't do the job and everyone else can, obviously that's going to affect things a lot. So from a business aspect, in my mind, it's a little bit clearer. Now, of course, there are other things that have changed about recent cameras too. I wouldn't even be on YouTube right now if it weren't for a lot of those advancements, and that's video. You know, right now as I sit here with my D600 recording me, you know, that's not something that I would have been able to do just 3 or 4 years ago, because particularly on Nikon, the video offerings just weren't there. So that's something that's affected things. There are other aspects of image quality that have improved. We've now got cameras, of course, I keep talking about ISO because that's probably the biggest single most area where you see the greatest change in camera image quality, in my opinion, is high ISO performance. But of course, there's other things. You've got dynamic range, you've got color depth that's improved, and of course, controls have improved, focusing systems have improved. So there's lots and lots of other things too that have changed. And if you guys are more interested in that, that may be something that we talk about in future videos. But for this video, I wanted to talk about high ISO because, as I said, that's something that's very easy to quantify, and it's something that's very easy to see a very drastic difference in. In the description below, I'll put some of the example photos that I shot. I shot with the Nikon D200, I shot with the D700, the D600, and also the D800. And I shot each camera starting at ISO 400, and I went up to the maximum high ISO on each camera model. So you guys can take a look at those symbols below, and you can see exactly what I mean about quality differences. So yeah, if you're shooting in very low light conditions, and you need the best possible image quality, then yes, going with a newer camera model is going to make a huge difference. As always though, I always recommend that you upgrade your lenses first. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've seen people, I have seen people, you know, use very high-end cameras. I've known people to buy a camera like a Nikon D3 and literally use it with like an 18 to 55 and 55 to 200 kit lens, and you don't want to do that. You know, if you're looking at getting a new camera set up and you have enough money to buy the higher end camera, but you also need new lenses, I always recommend going to the lower camera model and buying better lenses with it versus buying the higher camera model and using it with your existing lenses. So in most cases, I mean, that's gonna make a lot more sense. If anyone has any questions, just write me in the comments below. If you would like to see any of the other aspects of how older cameras versus newer cameras, if you want to see more about what's evolved over the years, give me some feedback on that too. I'd like to know, and I may be making more videos in this range. Until next time, this is Jeremy Smith, Photalk Jay the Great, signing off.